4 generations of physicians, 3 generations of osteopathic physicians. My dad and granddad went to Des Moines. I was a trader and went to the founding school, the Kirksville College, because of their rural clinic program. And it was a wonderful experience. I did my postgraduate training here in Arizona. I was actually raised in Tucson and went back there for my postgraduate work. And then, since I was one of the nation's first public health service scholarship recipients, I knew I was going somewhere. And we had decided that the opportunities to go into the Indian Health Service and see a whole different culture was the optimum for us. And so my top choice was Anchorage, Alaska, and I was fortunate enough to be assigned up there. So immediately after my postgraduate training, back then, you were required to kind of immediately go into practice. And so I joined a 10-physician group in Anchorage, Alaska that provided health care, primary care services from the Canadian border to the end of the Aleutians. And while I was there, I saw the development and evolution of emergency medicine as a specialty. So I ended up with the emergency medicine boards from the MD side and the osteopathic boards in family medicine. So I'm a bit of a hybrid. I'll be talking a little bit about a term that my wife coined, and that is, and the first section of my presentation is on taking a sabbatical. As I ended up directing the emergency department of our statewide trauma center, the Alaska Native Medical Center. And it was a hectic practice, and I found that after 7 years that I wasn't spending as much time as I had felt was optimum to be with family. And so I asked the public health service, well, can I take a sabbatical year? And they didn't have any way at that time of doing that. So we planned for a year, and I gave them a year's notice and said, well, then I'm not going to renew my contract. And my wife came up with a term for an unsupported sabbatical year, or what she termed a BOMatical. So we closed down our life in Anchorage, Alaska. We had purchased property out at the end of the Alaska Peninsula, and spent the first portion of our time actually building on that. So for those of you that are not familiar, and I don't know if we've got a laser pointer here, Gary. This map here shows the state of Alaska, and that would virtually go coast to coast in the lower 48. That's huge. There's been always a threat that if the Texans become too outrageous, we'll divide Alaska in half and make Texas the 3rd largest state. But so this is the whole state. The dark portion of that is represented in the larger scale map. And so this is the Alaska Peninsula that's coming down from mainland Alaska. And this is Unimak Island. So this is the kind of the closest village to our property is False Pass, which is right there on Unimak Island. Oh, super. This is Unimak Island from the space. And this right here is False Pass. It's the first saltwater passage between the Alaska Peninsula, which goes way up here, and the first Aleutian Island, Unimak Island. And so we've got the Bering Sea here and the North Pacific here, and our property is right on that point. And it's right sandwiched. One side is the Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge. The other side is the Alaska Peninsula National Wildlife Refuge. It's about 750 miles from the nearest road that's connected to anything, and that's home. And we had made arrangements to have some of our property kind of, the public health service would airlift out a certain number of pounds, and so they sent that to False Pass. They just kind of arrived there at the airport, the cannery, put it on a pallet someplace, and we were sending stuff for like 6 months. We never lost a single package. People just took care of it, and it was all there waiting for us. One of the local fishing boats loaded all the stuff onto the boat. We went the 27 miles across the ocean to our land, and here is right after they dropped us off on the beach. And we immediately set to work building some form of shelter. So this is a Hanson Weatherford, which is built in Colorado. It's a fancy 3-layer fabric Quonset hut in essence. But we doubled the amount of steel reinforcements so that it would handle the Aleutian winds. We tested it at 120 knots. It's supposed to be good to 140. And it's an amazing shelter. And so the first thing we did is put in an insulated floor, ground anchored that to the beach berm, and then erected the weather port so that we had a watertight shelter. And eventually it began to look like home. You can see Delos there in the lower right-hand picture. She's sitting on a whale vertebrae that whale had washed up on our beach in the years prior to our finding this property, and so we're still utilizing. You can see in the picture above that the ribs that we eventually plan on utilizing, and we've got the skull and the whole whale skeleton there. This is Delos doing dishes on the front porch, and she had a unique view. This is Shishaldin Volcano, the highest point in the Aleutian Islands, and we are the only people that can see it. They're from a permanent dwelling. It's a gorgeous, like Mount Fuji in Japan. On the rare nice day, we would kind of drop whatever we were doing, and this is an abandoned native village of Morshobi that we took the skiff over to look at. Not long after this picture was taken, the weather moved in. It became foggy. You could see about 40 feet, and we were heading back to our property, and we heard an outboard motor. Well, this is a long ways from anything, and I figured the only reason someone would be out with an outboard was that something had happened in the village and they were looking for me. I was the only physician for 500 miles. And so we kind of honed in on the sound, and sure enough, someone had fallen off of the dock. And so all the time that we were here and living in the bush, I had previously taken care of these villages when I was with the Public Health Service. So we just continued to care for everyone for free. And so it actually at times was fairly significant because there's a lot of trauma that comes in off of the North Pacific. You've probably seen the deadliest catch, and that port is a few islands on out in the Aleutians from us, but that's the sort of thing that we would occasionally see. We built there on that property, and as we were listening in the evening time, we couldn't get AM radio in the day, but in the evening we could receive a radio reception from Dillingham, about 500 miles away. And there was a broadcast on their equivalent of NPR. It was called Radio Reader, and they were reading a book called Miles from Nowhere by Barbara Savage. And fascinating account of a young couple who decided that there was more to life than just work, 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 work. And they virtually sold all their possessions and grabbed their bikes and bicycle toured around the world. And she was just a fascinating author. Well, we're listening to this and we thought, well, we could do that. And so we, winters are long and harsh in Alaska, particularly in this region. So we loaded up our stuff and flew to Seattle and caught a plane on. Then we went to Arizona and bought a new bike for my oldest boy, and this is our arrival in New Zealand. And we decided we would spend most of a couple months bicycling in New Zealand, Australia, and Fiji. And so we spent the next, actually we ended up spending most of our time in New Zealand because for any of you that are bicyclists, this is the Mecca. This is the most wonderful place in the world to bicycle through. So we ended up doing both islands of New Zealand together as a family, and it was a real experience. The people are the friendliest people in the world, but the opportunity to kind of be together and work together as we bicycled along. We would camp for about 2 nights, and then we would stay at either a youth hostel or they have motor camps, which are like a fancy but really cheap KOA. It cost us at that time about $3.50. The dollar was particularly strong in New Zealand. And so we could live for virtually nothing. I think we spent $3,000 to live for 2 months and tour 4 countries. And so it was a good time to be down under. This was my oldest boy now. Ryan is the one that's in practice, a family physician in Anchorage, Alaska, and he was, I think, 6 and turned 7 during this trip. The real challenge for him was finding a bicycle that would go 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers. And we found a little small frame Fuji, I think it was right out of Japan, and then modified it for him. Once I got the gearing right, I had created a monster, and I was pulling a trailer and had full panniers years, and I became the limiting factor. And he would go up the hills and come back down and taunt me, you know, what's keeping you, Dad? And he was really quite the bicycler. My youngest son, Justin, had, I think, the hardest job, and he would sit in his trailer all day, day after day, and never complained at all. There were a few times when I would kick him out on the uphills in the mountains, and he would run alongside the trailer. But he really, I thought that was the hardest job. He is, I tease him, he's my failure. The first of 4 generations that didn't go into primary care, and he's an interventional radiologist and teaches at UCLA, and he's taking over their fellowship there. So he didn't turn out too bad. We spent a couple months in New Zealand and we finished our time in Australia and Fiji. There's just not enough time. Australia would take a whole year to tour and give it the time that it deserves. And Fiji was, we planned on touring all around Fiji. We found one beach that was just absolutely perfect. You learn about these things as you're traveling on a shoestring. And so we were at a youth hostel and they were talking about this great Seashell Cove resort, and where you could for, I think it was about 3.5 a day, and they opened up the whole resort for you, and they treated us like we were family or one of the employees, whereas everyone else was paying the big bucks, and they didn't have as good an experience. But we camped there right on the beach. And then eventually we had to go back because we had to get our greenhouse planted. And so this is coming back to Stonewall. This is, the background there is Unimak Island once again, and it's about a mile across there, and just a gorgeous view. The ocean there was very challenging because it's you have 2 tides, one from the Bering Sea, one from the North Pacific, and they would all interact. There were whirlpools and overfalls and tide events, and they called it False Pass because so many vessels were lost there. Sailing ships couldn't navigate the narrow channels, and many were lost. It would be a great place to go scuba diving. And but we're on the mainland side there at Stonewall, and this is kind of the setup at Stonewall. The house was built into the side of the mountain, and we had a greenhouse and a boathouse and kind of a guest house and another little powerhouse. We had a small-scale hydroelectric plant. We could generate about 2,500 watts if it wasn't frozen up in winter and dried up in summer. But when it was up, it was a real luxury. And so we decided to spend the next year there, and so this is kind of life at Stonewall. You notice the bread there. Well, in order to have the bread, you had to grind the wheat to make the flour, to bake the bread, and it was a big deal, but well worth it. And Delassa's making salmonberry caldo there. When the hydroelectric plant was down, we heated with wood, but there are no trees in this area of Alaska. This is all wood that's fallen off of vessels headed for Japan, and so we would harvest those when we can. And we saved them up for, like they were accumulated over about 3 years, and we would dry them for a few years and then split them, and we could heat water 1,000 gallons in a boiler every 3 days. And so on those days, you got your shower, you washed the clothes, and you heated the house for the next 3 days. And so it worked out really, really well. The greenhouse is here, and this is kind of the kitchen area. For other sources of sustenance, you've got to be either lazy or stupid if you're living on the ocean in Alaska, not to survive quite well. So this is Ryan and his first halibut. It's just like going to a grocery store out there. You go across and you catch something for bait. You go out into the bay, and one of those rare days when it's quiet enough to do so, catch a slack tide, drop it down, set the hook, and hope that the fish isn't too large, because we had no way to preserve it for a prolonged period of time other than salting or smoking or something. And the caribou season back then was really long, so it was almost a 9-month season. So I could also harvest about 3 caribou over the course of the year that you could periodically see. They had some red meat, and the rest of the time we just declared ourselves vegetarians. It was a lot easier, and you really couldn't afford meat in the closest village. A small roast would be like $45 back then, probably significantly more now. We homeschooled. The state of Alaska has a great homeschooling program, and the best of materials. And I probably learned more about my boys in the period where I taught them. I did math and science, and Delos did everything else, and did it well. But I learned more about how the boys thought by teaching them than I think anything else. And that was really, for me, a golden opportunity, and I underappreciated that. Rare nice day, because life there is a series of one storm after another that move their way down the Aleutians. And for those of you that are in medicine, they might recognize the red cover that's just off of Delos' shoulder. That's Tintinelli's study guide for emergency medicine, which was my constant companion for most of this trip, that allowed me to better prepare for the specialty boards. And this is another slightly out of focus photograph, kind of a nice day. Any time that the day was good, we would stop what we were doing, whatever the work was, and get out and try to enjoy it, because they're all too infrequent. This is one of the rare cold days. The area here at the end of the Alaska Peninsula, in fact all along the Alaska Peninsula, is warmed by the Japanese current. So the temperatures aren't the 60 below that you hear in Fairbanks, or 80 below on the North Slope. And so this was a day that was a mere, 0 or 10 below. But the fresh water has frozen on the inlet creeks, and then it's broken up, and with the tidal changes floating past us in Isanatski Strait. And what you can't see is a lot of these little mini icebergs were decorated with seals and sea otters and eagles, and they came down at one tide change, and then you saw the parade go past again as the tide changed, and they moved past in the other direction. It was really a spectacular sight. This was the more typical weather in the region of Falls Pass. It's probably blowing 80 or 90 out there. Sheets of water being raised off of the surface of the ocean and actually come up the 100 yards or so from the beach up, and you get seaweed on the front windows of the house. It's a challenging climate, but it is what has kept it pristine to where you see, you can see brown grizzlies, you can see tracks on the beach almost any morning when the bears are out. And it is really unique. Well, we had planned to spend a year. We found if you're living in the bush, there's not much to spend money on. You don't make a whole lot in comparison in public service, but we had saved enough for 1 year. We found we were living on about $105 a month, living subsistence lifestyle, if you can imagine that. And so we stayed for another year. So we spent most of 2 years here at Stonewall. And then we decided, well, good things have to come to an end. Eventually, you've got to go back to work. And so we arrived, we decided we would bicycle for another couple of months and do England, Spain, and Portugal, burn up the last of our money. And we arrived back in Seattle with $100 in cash, an unused Visa card, and an absolutely wonderful job in Fairbanks, Alaska, in the emergency department. And you just start all over again. So we suffered not at all. We had a great time in Europe, just for a very quick view. And so we bicycled. This is, I think, Spain, and then we crossed over the Rio Minho into Portugal. Another wonderful bicycling area. This is an excuse to be, I think I'm supposed to be studying emergency medicine there, but also sampling a little fine Portuguese wine, and it wasn't a bad one. Well, let me shift gears. I talked a little bit about how to take a biomedical. Maybe I'll spend a little time on frontier medicine. And there's a lot of question of, well, what do you mean by frontier medicine? When I was in practice in Missouri, after we left Alaska, we lived on a farm, and I think you would say that's rural medicine. And most people would define frontier medicine by a very low population rate per square mile. And so you see that, and I would encourage all of you, we're seeing a great interest in students going to serve in international experiences, and I strongly support that. It's a wonderful way to help society, use your skills, develop an appreciation for exactly how good we have it here in this country. And I think that, those sorts of places, Africa and remote India and South America, that's frontier medicine as well. You can do it here in this country on almost any Indian reservation. This is Canyon de Chelly. And most of those locations, particularly out west, would qualify. For us, this is Falls Pass. This is On that first Aleutian Island, population about 35. It swells to about 70 or 80 in summer with the fish season, but it's not exactly a large metropolis. The healthcare system in Alaska is quite different. It's been studied internationally, and to provide care for these very remote locations, the Native Medical Center and the Indian Health Service would find individuals within the village, oftentimes nominated and selected by that community. And we would bring them to Anchorage and train them. Some may not even have a high school degree. And we would train them in basic primary care, show them and give them a book called the Village Health Aid Manual, which was actually redone by one of my partners. The original one was written by a dentist and did a spectacular job. And one of my partners, a family physician, Rob Burgess, redid it and updated it, and now it's been redone again once or twice. But basically, it was a cookbook of medicine, and you could have a patient come in abdominal pain, and they could turn to abdominal pain, and it would remind them the physical exam that they should do and the history that they should take, etc. And then they would get in touch with us. Initially, when I first got there, it was via shortwave radio. So we would have radio call in the morning and hear about conditions. I can recall the first time I was called up. It was out in the Bering Sea, and the halibut fisherman had a halibut hook that was embedded in his hand. Well, for those of you that have fished commercially halibut, a halibut hook is about that big. I mean, it's huge. And, you know, the conventional wisdom is you rock it through and cut off the barb and then bring it back along the track. But there's a lot of structures in a hand. And I was not too anxious to remove it in that fashion. I had read an article in Emergency Medicine magazine, you know, months before about a new technique where they would put a piece of string around the curved portion of the hook, press on the shank to disengage the barb, and then just pop it out. I'd never done it, but it seemed like a good idea to me, so I described it over the shortwave to the health aide, 1,000 or so miles away, and also instructions for kind of numbing up the track with a little lidocaine. And then waited, you know, because my malpractice is on the line, and she got back on the radio and said, "Worked like a charm," and everything went fine. But that's kind of a different style of practice. Now it has evolved to where we went from shortwave to a single satellite phone, an addition in each village. So we had one phone, but we had good communication then. And now some of the villages have interactive video, and heck, I can talk with them on, you know, and see them, and so things are changing. About twice a year, I had a series of villages that I would provide primary care for. And so I would go out for a couple weeks and hit 4 or 5 villages and try to do all the cancer follow-up, the surgery follow-up, the prenatal visits, any procedures that needed to be done, see anyone for whatever. And it was a very busy time because you could never tell what the weather was going to do. But we would travel either via boat. This is the Tuscamina that would take me to Kodiak, and the mainstay was small aircraft that would fly into these villages. You know, there was a whole host of aircraft that we could charter, and so this is flying into my largest village on Kodiak Island. I had the 5 villages off the road system, and this is the largest heading for Old Harbor, which is population about 600. And beautiful here, this is Sitpallitic Strait. Sitpallitic Island is on the left, and Kodiak Island is on the right. This is the more typical weather, and you're kind of flying, trying to get under the weather. At this time, I was wondering whether I should cut the shoestrings on my boots, because if that engine stopped, we're going into the drink. But didn't have any problems. I never had any, personally, never had any serious situations, although we did lose several healthcare providers, nurses, escorts, etc., when they were trying to push the winter to get patients out. Dangerous place to travel. When you arrived at the village, frequently the whole village would show up to kind of help unload and greet. This was the mayor of Old Harbor, and it was my approach to bring the whole family with me. It set a very different stage in my relationship with the community and individual patients, and because they could see we're just regular people, and it really did help out. I sometimes learned more listening to the stories as related to Delos, taking banyas with the old women at night and find out what's really going on behind the scenes in the village than I did getting histories in the clinic during the day. It was an interesting situation. This is the clinic in Old Harbor, so it's kind of I think we had, this is a luxury, this is a big clinic. I had 2 exam rooms, a waiting room, there's a shortwave in the corner, there's a satellite phone in the adjacent room, and this is Jenny Erickson, who is the health aide that provided. She was the one that we trained for primary care, and that I would interact with over a radio or satellite phone throughout the year as she had problems and make the decision on whether she could handle it or whether we had to bring it at thousands of dollars of expense back to Anchorage. It wasn't all just simple, straightforward conditions. This was a gunshot wound. We also trained medical students and residents, mostly from the University of Washington. So this is a whammy student and stuff. And I would always try to take the medical students with me. They would never be able to afford to travel into this area. And also they saw kind of a unique approach to medicine in being out there. And in this case, I had someone who would escort the patient back to Anchorage, kind of a semi-challenged airway. On to the next village. This is heading for Carlick, one of the most scenic villages. This is the Carlick River, and this has such a tremendous salmon run that they said that you can almost walk across the river on the backs of the salmon. I mean, 5 species of salmon on the river. It's a phenomenal place to sport fish. That particular year, we decided to come in on the gravel strip, or it was just kind of a relatively unimproved. We couldn't even bring a full plane load in, so we took the gear and divided it in half and made 2 trips. And then we had to carry everything because there are no roads. So you carry everything on boardwalks down to the clinic. And the clinic is this building right here, right next to the satellite dish. The one mechanism for outside contact. And that was a building, there's a little closer view, that's where you cooked your meals, you slept at night, and you saw patients throughout the day. Although frequently, the school teachers or the local population would invite you over for dinner so that you didn't have to cook everything. But that was kind of your home for the time period that you're there. The religion in most of the Aleutians is Russian Orthodox, and so most of the villages have just a gorgeous church. And this is dating back, unbelievable carpentry dating back to the 1800s. And then this is old Carlick below it. There's a new Carlick, and now there's a new Carlick as they have grown, modernized, and expanded. In the foreground, there's a long sand spit that separates you from the North Pacific. They used to have 7 canneries on it, and over the years, fires and the tremendous storms have removed all of them. And the following year, there's a bridge there, kind of in the background, that right here. And the following year, a storm came in and they lost the bridge. And so it's a relatively harsh environment. Having the kids and the family there was just invaluable. And the Aleut people just loved children. And so they would just kind of adopt the kids and fit in. In fact, at one point, when I had to go out to Anchorage for emergency medical care, left the family in the village, and they just put them in school and gave them a place to stay, and they were part of the community until I could get back. This is another village, Larsen Bay, big cannery pack in Larsen Bay. That's the major economy out here, but a pretty area. And you're starting to see some bushes and a little bit more growth covering the tundra. At this particular visit, I was accompanied by a public health nurse, and unfortunately, she developed appendicitis, and so we had to evac her out for surgery, and then finish the series of village visits on my own. But we did keep her out in the cemetery. This is my most scenic village on Kodiak Island. This is Uzingi on Spruce Island, not all that far from the town of Kodiak, and this is just gorgeous. I mean, these huge spruce forests, and back then there were no roads on the island, so it was just these wooden walkways between the houses. It was really unique, and you can see the Russian Orthodox Church in the background. The person driving the old garden tractor, now just a means of getting gear from the beach to the clinic, is the husband of the health aide. He was a Baptist minister, And he worked for 30-some years by the time I got here, trying to convert the Russian Orthodox. I think he converted one or two, but they participated in some of the ceremonies, and they were pillars of the community. His wife, Joyce, was the health aide. Her daughter, actually, was an internist that practiced in Washington State. But I would usually stay with them after they would kind of take me up these boardwalks off of the beach. And then they lived in an old orphanage, and so there was lots of space. We had room to see patients. I had a place to sleep, and Joyce was a wonderful cook. So I lived like a king when I was in Yuzinki. This was my smallest village in Kodiak, and this is Akiak. And sometimes Akiak is clear at the west side of the island, and with that typically poor weather, you could never be sure that you would make it into Akiak at all. I think I was able to make it in less than half of the time. And I can recall the first time that I got in, I immediately had a lady that had an uncontrolled seizure disorder and a cranial problem, and had to turn around and fly with her back to Kodiak and then try to get back out again. But we made it. I think we ran clinic that night until well past midnight. There was no clinic building in Akiak. It was too small. It was a small school. So we used the blackboards to screen out the area. We took a kitchen table, and you turn your speculum upside down with a headlamp, and you do pap smears and pelvic exams, a little bit more rough fashion, but we got it done. And it was the only chance that they were going to have without spending literally thousands of dollars to make it in to Kodiak or on an Anchorage. And so we tried to get everything done that we could. After 3 or 4 years, Canada, the Kodiak Area Native Association, had some money to hire their own physician, and so they offered me that position. I really loved working for the Indian Health Service and being a commissioned officer in the Corps. And so I stayed with the IHS in Anchorage, and I was assigned some new villages out at the very end of the Alaska Peninsula and the proximal Aleutians, which eventually became our home. So I had 4 villages out there. This is coming into the old Fort Randall, or Cold Bay, which was an Army Air Corps base. They had an instrument approach runway there, which was really nice. And beautiful mountains on both sides, but it was nice and flat, and you could land a fairly good-sized aircraft there. This is coming in a Grumman Goose. You can see it's kind of angled to the side to this crab because of the wind, probably. But and so I could get there with a turboprop, and then we'd usually take a small aircraft to the neighboring villages, King Cove, Falls Pass, Belkowski, and then I would hit Cold Bay as well. This is leftover architecture from World War II and the Thousand Miles War, where the Japanese had actually claimed territory at the west end of the Aleutians, and we eventually worked our way out to kind of pick them off. So this is some of the old Quonset huts at Fort Randall that remain, in this case now a chapel. There was, at that era, a dew site, an early morning site. In fact, I could see them occasionally elsewhere in Alaska. But this is really cool because you're out there kind of in the middle of the tundra, and you go into the dew site, and they've got a bowling alley and a commissary and hot meals, and it was pretty cool to visit them, particularly after you've been out in the bush for a while and haven't had fresh food. This is the road out there, and the sign you probably can't read, but it says, "Drive safely, the life you save may be your replacements." This was not an ideal assignment. In this particular case, I've flown into Cold Bay, and it was blowing. It doesn't look that bad from the surface of the ocean, so it must have been just starting. But the pilots wouldn't fly, and I never questioned the pilot. If the pilot didn't want to fly, I'll just wait until tomorrow. But in this case, we were really needed in the village, so that they sent a 97-foot crabber over to pick us up, and then took us back to the village so that we could get to work a little sooner. And the good weather we could land. This is behind my largest village, King Cove, and there's a little airstrip down there, and kind of in the early fall. This is the village of King Cove, 600 to 800, one of the largest salmon packs in the world, and just crazy busy in the summer. And then it quiets down, and there are about 600 permanent residents there. On a kind of a beach berm, and then behind it is a big freshwater estuary, and if they could ever harness the power that goes into the estuary and out, it runs like a river, they wouldn't need diesel power out there. They'd have great hydroelectric. This is the, if you look on the building, it says hospital. Well, it's a pretty small hospital. Had one waiting room, one exam room, and 2 beds at the back, one on one side for the patient and one for me, and a little kind of a kitchenette area. But it was a small hospital, and it was adequate for a lot of what we saw. At times it got a little crazy, but that's where I would do most of my activities when I wasn't doing house call. Fishing out there is the major economy. This is their new boat harbor, and actually, those that had salmon permits did quite well economically. I mean, you could make $250,000 or $500,000 in a 6 weeks to 2 month season if you were lucky and good. But amazing place, but it wasn't without its dangers. And this is kind of an example of that. This is a 4 by 8 by 8 foot crab pot, and you can see the ice is formed on the mesh. Well, they'd stack these up on the decks for, they might be stacked 10 or 15 or 20 high. The spray building up on that mesh would eventually stabilize the vessel, and that's why some of those fatalities occur. They turn turtle, and it's a terribly cold water, and that's usually the end of things. Even in a survival suit, we don't have that long. Back then, they served kind of family style. This is the inside of the cannery for the cafeteria. And they used a lot of Filipino labor in the summer, so there was some unique spices on the table. It was a great place to eat. I was supposed to charge anyone that was not an Alaska native while I was on my trip. And I said, well, if you send someone to collect the stuff and do all the paperwork, you can do that, but I'm not going to charge anybody. And so I had heart luck, because the cannery extended me every courtesy. I always had a place to stay, I had a meal to eat, coffee to drink, and it worked out very, very well. And this is another medical student, took off at noon, and we borrowed their 3-wheelers or 4-wheelers, and are taking a quick tour before we had to get back to work. And this is kind of making the turn as we're going from King Cove to False Pass, a village that I mentioned earlier, top 30 population, 35. This is Sentinel Peak, and the place that we live is just kind of inside the passage here, about halfway to the Bering Sea. This is the hospital in False Pass, and it's about the same as the one in King Cove, but again, it was adequate. And all I can say is it was a fascinating experience. You get to use the full range of your medical training. You don't have the luxury of immediately jumping to an MRI or a CT scan. You gotta, go back to history and physical examination, basic diagnostic equipment. It's amazing what you can do, and also you have to improvise a little. One of the advantages of being a physician in Anchorage is that I had a chance, as one of our colleagues here in the audience, of doing temporary duty. In order to let the field hospitals, the smaller, more remote facilities, have a little relief so that they could get CME or go down and see family in the lower 48. We help them out. So this is the old hospital at Kotzebue, and below that, the old hospital at Bethel. Both of these have been replaced by absolutely gorgeous, state-of-the-art facilities. But back then, it was a little bit more basic. But we had everything we needed, and I think when I was at Bethel, which now has maybe 20, 25 physicians, and I don't know how many dentists, it's getting fairly large. There were 3 of us there, and I can recall we had a hot belly that came in, and appendicitis, and we couldn't get them out to Anchorage, so one of us was a surgeon, one of us was a first assistant, the other was the anesthesiologist. All 3 of us were family practice doctors. And it was a patient book, but it gets really lonely out there, particularly if you have an OB. We try to get the OBs out, but sometimes you know how kids are, or if you have a complication and have to do an emergency cesarean, it gets mighty lonely out there, but it's also extremely satisfying. And just no replacement for that. This is Kotzebue at 50 below, and this is the ocean is frozen, and they just freeze some stakes in place, run the cord out to heat the aircraft, and it becomes a runway. For those of you that think that you might want to do a rotation or have a clinical experience in Alaska, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, they make arrangements for residents and medical students and PAs and dentists, and so they're a good place, a source of contact. Do so long before you want to go there. It's very popular. It's not easy to get in, and so make arrangements like a year or more before you would like to go, and get in contact with them. You can see their website, and if I can give any help, please feel free to involve me. For the medical students that are here, there's only one residency in Alaska now. That's the family medicine program. That's in Anchorage at Providence Hospital. They have an excellent sub-internship. A friend of mine I did a fellowship with, that was her special project. And now she's trying to do a new residency in Wasilla, and we at SOMA are trying to get one going in Fairbanks. Hopefully we'll change that to where there's more than one residency up there. Other resources, the Northwest Regional Primary Care Association is our partner for the Portland campus that is 5 states actually. And one of them is Alaska, so they know a lot of people and love to work with PAs and dentists in addition to medical students. And so they would be an excellent contact. Bruce Gray is the CEO there. You just couldn't find a nicer person. For the DOs, the Northwest Osteopathic Medical Foundation is very supportive and helpful, particularly for those that are from the Pacific Northwest or want to go back there, and I've got a little bit of information. And always the State Professional Association, dental, PA, or medical is helpful. Here's my contact information. I've got a few cards with me if anyone would like to have that. My easiest way to reach me is via the cell phone, because people have asked, well, you know, what's next? What are you doing now? And I had actually planned on retiring, and we looked for 25 years for a place, and we finally, after going through all of Arizona and New Mexico and southern Utah, we found a place in southern Colorado that both met my wife's criteria. It's got to be so pretty that you fall on your knees and weep, and that we could afford, which is the bigger challenge. And so this is Spirit Bear Ranch. It's an 1870s era homestead that we're trying to make livable once again. No one's been there since the 1950s, and so you can imagine what the inside of the buildings look like. DeLoss calls the old homestead Hanta Heaven for the Hanta bunnies. But we have red cliffs, kind of like Sedona. We've got a trout stream that runs through the property with beaver dams. It's a little bit of a fixer-upper. This is the barn. When DeLoss and I were working our way through school, we used to point out these old buildings that had no roof and the windows were falling out. And we'd say, there's a place we can afford. Well, that's a place we can afford. So it's going to take a lot of work. We're currently living in a tent, but it's amazing what you can do in a tent. So we've got interactive video, and we can talk all over the world and still remain connected and work on developing residency programs for the university, even from a relatively rural. Compared to Falls Pass, this is a piece of cake. I mean, this is only on a 4.5-mile Jeep road to get to it, rather than 750 miles of nothing. And so this is much easier, although we may end up getting snowed in this winter. That's kind of the inside of the tent, and sometimes DeLoss is seen in the background as I'm on video conferences, kind of cleaning up. We're currently working with a 1700s era hand-hewn Amish place, post-convene construction that will be DeLoss's studio, but we'll end up living there for the next several years. So this is the beams going up. And it's been a nice fall. I mean, beautiful fall colors, and that's kind of a look of the ranch here in the last several weeks before all the leaves fell. Getting visits by lots of wildlife. I've got a wildlife camera up, and so we've caught coyotes there at the first snowfall. If you look real close, there's a bear in there on the left-hand side. He's been coming through periodically, so we're a little bit cautious. They said that there were no wild turkeys there, but you know, I guess they failed to tell the turkeys. So the loss saw a flock of about 60, and we've seen smaller flocks as well. About 2 miles away, we've got Mount Sheep, Rocky Mountain Bighorn, and just hundreds and hundreds of deer. The migration is right through the woods, so that we have deer now, and by the time we get back, we'll probably have elk as well. But we've got a lot to do before what it looks like here in the good weather and the late summer turns into this, which is we've already had 3 snowfalls, and we'll probably have a good collection before very long. My advice is not that profound, but I advise all of you in kind of in life in general to follow your heart, whether it's residency selection or life partners or whatever. I found that the most accurate prediction on the best path. set your sights high. You know, I think we all tend to underestimate what we can do and what we can achieve. The next one is a motto of mine, is leap and the safety net will appear. I had the pleasure of helping to establish 2 new osteopathic medical schools. And without that, just the confidence that you'll just do whatever it is to persevere and get it done, I don't think that it would have been possible. Dr. Simon and I worked really hard in the startup years at Soma, and you just have to just persevere and have confidence that a mechanism will come about, and it always has. I think taking on more than you think you can accomplish is advisable. It's either going to be the Peter principle when you rise to the point where you're as high as you're going to go, or you find that you're capable of doing more than you anticipated, and you can reap the rewards of that. Don't be afraid to be different. There were all sorts of people who told us, you're crazy for doing this, giving up a prestigious practice in medicine and going and being a bum for a year. It was the best thing that I ever did. And it didn't seem to hurt the boys too much. And I would do it again in a heartbeat and would hardly recommend it. Don't want to be reckless, but I think it has been more than worthwhile. And enjoy the journey. It is possible to have a life, pardon me, after you're a professional career, there is life after that. So thank you for your attention.
So we have 7 or 8 minutes. I'm going to take 1 or 2 questions, and then Dr. McWilliams will be available afterwards. Any questions from the audience?
Yes, sir. If you take the mic, because I think they're videoing this and they'd like to capture the questions.
Did it take any convincing to convince your wife to go on this grand adventure?
The answer is no. We've been married this month 43 years, and ever since I was very young and I met Tom, all I wanted to do was live out on a ranch very remote.
But I can tell you that finding the right person to share this with was absolutely critical. There's no way I could have done that with this. And I don't know anyone else who would. I left her for a couple of weeks while I was taking the emergency medicine boards out in the middle of nowhere by herself, with bears and terrible storms, and she just carried on.
Well, as you guys know, ATSU has a tremendous commitment to the underserved. We've got a wonderful partnership with the nation's health centers. And one of the ways that we've been able to accomplish making the big difference that we make is who we hire. And we have not only Dr. McWilliams, who we're so blessed to have as an example for you, but there are a lot of faculty members and deans and others who've done similar things in their life. And I encourage you to look at them and talk to them and ask them about what they've done to make a difference so that they can trigger ideas for yourself. Thanks for coming to our Hero Leaders Talk.